Thank you very much, Dan. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. You're going to see in a moment really what is the emerging future of the World Jewish Congress, and see that it is a very, very bright future indeed, tarte mashma, as we say. But let me just make several introductory comments before turning to my colleagues, who are going to offer very brief perspectives on issues that are complementary but different, and I think enriching to the presentations that we've heard this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, at the last governing board, which was in September, so really only 3-4 months before the onset of the so-called Arab Spring, I spoke before you about that Arab states were increasingly unable to provide security and essential public goods to their citizens, and how anti-Western states, primarily Iran and Syria, were forming new alliances with their non-state actor proxies, Hezbollah and Hamas, and were increasingly exploiting ungoverned spaces in Lebanon, in Gaza, and Sinai, to wage asymmetrical war against Israel and other liberal democracies. And I argued that this represents a new species of warfare that utilizes terrorist, military, but also legal, political, and media mechanisms to what I describe as achieve the Gulliverization, the binding and the tethering of Israel and other liberal democracies, and that this was really facilitated by a failure of international law and a failure of international institutions to take account of the new regional reality. Now, 10 months later, I think my colleagues and I wish to share with you our deep concern that these failures are merely symptomatic of a wider crisis, of a crisis of sovereignty. That principle of state sovereignty that has been with us as the organizing principle of international law and international relations for more than 350 years is now failing and is really needs to be rethought given what is happening around us. Let me just state that the basic rule of conventional sovereignty is that each state has the right to determine its own domestic authority structure, that outsiders must not interfere in those domestic affairs, the so-called the principle of non-intervention, and that in the international systems, states are like individuals in society. They are equal and they have rights and responsibilities. Now, conventional sovereignty, which has since become the global standard, assumes a world of autonomous, internationally recognized, and most importantly, effectively governed states. Under this model, it is state-to-state relations that are what counts, and states are accountable for threats that emanate from within their territory. But this world no longer exists, and so conventional sovereignty no longer works. Today, there are between 30 and 45 failed states, and this number is growing. Indeed, Israel is increasingly surrounded by failing and failed states, from Lebanon and Libya to Syria and Yemen to Sudan and Somalia, as well as by ungoverned non-state territories such as Gaza and increasingly Sinai. The Prime Minister has spoken recently about Sinai becoming a great cause of concern, another failed region in the wider context. Now, in the past, these weak entities would have been swallowed up by their neighbors or by powerful empires. But in today's world, that Darwinian mechanism has ceased to exist. States today are a little like diamonds. Once they are formed, they last forever. Unfortunately, unlike diamonds, not all states shine. Indeed, one of the most striking aspects of the contemporary world is the extent to which domestic sovereignty has ceased to function in states that still enjoy international legal sovereignty with all its benefits. And these benefits are considerable. Every state is entitled to the right of territorial integrity and self-defense. Every state is entitled, as a matter of law, to legislate and enforce rules within its territory, including Sharia law. Every state has the power to purchase and transfer state assets, to enter into contractual agreements. It has UN membership, and it is able to litigate before international tribunals and courts. Every state has sovereign immunity for the heads of state and its diplomats. Every state receives, if it wants, financial and technical assistance from the World Bank, from the IMF, from the UN. And it participates in the shaping of the international system. Thus, we have a situation today where states like Lebanon, like Pakistan, like Somalia, like Sudan, and like Yemen, entities that have effectively ceased to function internally and have become breeding grounds for international threats, these states continue to enjoy far-reaching privileges and protections. And similarly, states like Iran, Syria, and Pakistan retain their international legal sovereignty instead of having it curtailed. I would put it to you that this is absurd. And much more can and should be done to condition the benefits of sovereignty on responsible domestic and international behavior. Indeed, I would suggest that the World Jewish Congress consider leading a campaign that will highlight this anomaly and that will seek to ensure that sovereignty and the great international benefits that go with international legal sovereignty are conditioned on responsible sovereignty. Now, both the United States and the European Union have acknowledged this reality and have adopted the fundamental liberal insight whereby the foundations of true peace, security, and prosperity really depend on the nature of a state's government. The question that I put to Tony Blair highlights this. The European Union will not admit Turkey until it fulfills the enormously demanding Copenhagen criteria. The United States has recognized that the quality of the international society depends on the quality of the governments that are its foundation, that the best protection for our society is a world of well-governed democratic states. Yet we have so far failed to articulate an alternative doctrine to conventional sovereignty. Now, one idea that has been raised is to extend state-like rights and protections to troublesome non-state actors. Now, according to this rationale, groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, and Al-Qaeda would be engaged and brought into a new type of legal regime so that they will become more responsible international players. This, I believe, is a deeply flawed proposition. It not only ignores the fundamentally subversive goals of Islamic jihadi organizations and naively assumes that they can be tamed, but it takes us in an entirely wrong direction. Strengthening the peace and security of the world requires strengthening well-governed states, not empowering or legitimizing rogue non-state actors. Another idea that has been raised is to make consolidated liberal democracy a sine qua non condition for membership in good standing in the international community, and to effectively override sovereignty where the state does not meet this requirement. This, in principle, is an approach that has much to recommend it. Democracy is a universal human aspiration. No famine or genocide have ever taken place in a liberal democracy. Democracies are also more stable regimes and make reliable allies. In fact, there is now substantial state practice to support the idea that effective democratic government should be adopted as the only legitimate form of government. Once in a minority, today 63% of the world's states are electoral democracies. Once confined to Western Europe, North America, and a handful of former colonies of Britain, democracy today is a global phenomenon. Indeed, the only region in the world that has so far remained entirely impervious to democracy, with the singular exception of the State of Israel, is the Middle East. It is only in the Middle East that levels of human freedom have not only not improved, but they've deteriorated over the last 4 decades. And yet, as long as international giants like China and Russia do not make the transition to liberal democracy, making this a fundamental principle of a secure international order is probably unrealistic. However, while the free world cannot at this point insist on democracy being the foundational principle of international politics, it can, I believe, insist on the somewhat diminished standard of responsible sovereignty. The notion of responsible sovereignty would differ from conventional sovereignty in three key respects. Conventional sovereignty emphasizes non-interference and international juridical equality among states, whereas responsible sovereignty emphasizes positive duties, basic standards of state behavior. Secondly, responsible sovereignty is not entirely agnostic about regime type. It does not insist that the domestic government be a consolidated liberal democracy, but it does not tolerate state failure either. It demands, at the very least, that state effectiveness and legitimacy be conditions for recognizing a state as sovereign and for the state's enjoyment of privileges of international sovereignty. And finally, responsible sovereignty emphasizes states' accountability for actions that have consequences beyond their borders. In a world of diffuse threats and interdependent security, states cannot permit their territory to be used to launch cross-border attacks, let alone aid and abet the export of such attacks. Certainly, the notion of responsible sovereignty will mean different things in different contexts. For weak states that are willing to reform, it would involve positive measures such as greater governance assistance to improve state capacity. The Arab Human Development Reports, which were published from 2002 until 2003 and 6, provided us with a detailed roadmap of the fundamental economic and political and human rights reforms that the Arab world needs to undergo. We need to reinstate the Arab Human Development Reports and follow and monitor progress of Arab states towards economic development and political development. But most importantly, responsible sovereignty must be made a condition for gaining recognition as a state. There should be no new sovereignty without proven responsibility. It is one thing to have to deal with the consequences of state failure in an already existing state. It is quite another thing to permit the establishment of a new state where there is no guarantee of effective, stable, and peaceful statehood. Thus, at a time when the international community is struggling with the dire effects of state failure in the Middle East, it would be unconscionable, some would argue illegal, certainly unwise, to aid and abet the establishment of a new failed state in the West Bank and Gaza. This would be fundamentally at odds not only with the values of the free world, but with the principles we now understand to be the foundation of true peace and security. Thank you very much. Okay, so thank you. Yeah, right, we're going to keep this very short, and I apologize for going a little bit over time. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let me please introduce to you Dr. Harel Ben-Ari, who is an adjunct professor at the Law Faculty of Bar-Ilan University. He teaches courses in public international law and international criminal law. He was formerly the legal advisor to the Israeli mission in The Hague, and he is the author of a forthcoming book on international non-governmental organizations and accountability and responsibility. During this coming year, Dr. Ben-Ari will be a postdoctoral fellow in the New York University Hauser Global Law School Fellows Program. Ariel. That's true. I will introduce Elizabeth and Lisa momentarily. Both of them, together with myself, are members of the World Jewish Diplomatic Corps, which is an integral part and an affiliate of the World Jewish Congress.